Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'll be talking about The Accountant 2. This was an anticipated movie of mine to see this year, as I'm a pretty big fan of the first movie, and I got to see an early access screening of this last night. This movie will be out in theaters at the end of this month on April 24th. So The Accountant 2 brings back pretty much all of the core cast from the first movie minus one person, and we're set years after the events of the first movie, so a lot of things have changed, but we are still following Ben Affleck as Chris, who is basically continuing his mission of working through the cartel and solving puzzles and still building his accounting firm and just continuing what he was doing from the events of the first movie. But when it comes to the law enforcement, things have definitely changed there. If you look at J.K. Simmons' character, Ray King, he is no longer in this leadership position that he had in the first movie, but he is still on some cases. There's one in particular he's trying to resolve, dealing with a family where he believes like these children are being kidnapped or abducted, and he's trying to find help to get them free. We do have Mary Beth Medina coming back again, this character, but now she is more of a person in charge and still has that connection with Ray King, and through the events that we see at the opening of the movie brings her character into Ray King, who's basically saying like, hey, you need to go find the accountant, which is part of the case that they solved together from the first movie. We also have John Bernthal coming back playing Braxton, and what's cool about this movie is we get a lot more time with Chris and Braxton together as brothers and building on that dynamic. And the accountant, going into this, like, it was a movie where I never expected we would get a sequel for it. I thought the first movie was fine as is and was great just as a standalone movie. Hearing the sequel and seeing that all this cast was coming back for it definitely had me excited to check it out. And I will say, like, I had a great time watching this movie, and I think there's a lot that they did in this movie that really elevates it as a sequel. There are some issues I have with it, and we'll get into those in a little bit. But this movie pretty much follows, as I mentioned, with Ray King and Mary Beth, with what's going on at the intro of this movie and building up this storyline of there is a family and we're trying to figure out what happened with this family, especially with their child and the parents, and that's where essentially the puzzle element comes into play. Eventually Mary Beth gets with Chris and they start to solve this puzzle and kind of basically breadcrumb it to figure out like how can they figure out like where the father and the mother and the child are, and that's the core of this movie. And eventually Chris needs to pull in some help, and that's when he calls his brother Braxton, and once we get them together, things get really entertaining because this movie kind of bounces around a little bit in some very interesting ways, but I still think it's pretty entertaining, even though it gets a little silly at times. A lot of this movie is dealing with the subject matter of loneliness, kind of like how I mentioned in my previous review of Drop. Specifically with these two, as they are essentially assassins, as you will. Like, that's especially with Braxton. He's a gun for hire. Chris is kind of doing similar things, though they have different takes on going about things. And plus, Chris has his condition, and we get a lot of that into play with the school that the home that he's from, and how that's grown with the autistic kids and how they come into play and help. And we get some pretty crazy scenes with that element of it that really push the boundaries of like what's ethical in what they're doing, and we'll get more into that to a second. But to focus on the brother elements, both are kind of dealing with their own sense of loneliness in a very humorous way, because in certain elements, some of they want to be alone, but they want to have someone to care for. We get some moments with Chris where he's basically going on blind dates, and there's a whole element there. I won't spoil any of that because it's pretty funny, like if you watch the full scene. Braxton, on the other hand, they kind of lead you towards one direction, but it ends up being something completely different, which they play on through the whole movie, which is quite funny. But then when you get them together, they bicker a lot as brothers, because you get a little bit of that from the first movie of like, why don't you ever call me? Don't you want to hang out with me? Don't you love me? Like, why don't we spend more time together? Why does it always have to be during these moments when you just need something from me? And we see that play on throughout the whole movie, but we do get some pretty entertaining moments of them together when they're just kind of trying to be around, you know, normal people essentially. And that's another big play into the story, is like, you know, how can, you know, Chris be more normal, or kind of build relationships better with others, especially dealing with you know, the autism and things like that. But then once we get into the actual like puzzle and the more action scenes of it, those are pretty fun, especially when you get into the third act. A lot of more snipers involved, which is pretty cool. So there's some characters, new characters in this movie in terms of the villains that we're following. And there's times when the story gets a little bit muddy and it's hard to kind of really piece together things. And there's one assassin in particular that we follow with her story that it was weird to buy into at certain points, and it's very weird, but at the same time it does work for the movie. I just wish they would have executed it a little bit better. I think a lot of the story and how some things are potentially rushed through or not really explained clearly enough kind of weaken the movie, but all in all, I think, you know, it does flow with what you are familiar with of the first movie. I think the only other thing I can nitpick about is when it comes to like the accounting side of things, more of those elements that we got from the first movie, those are a little bit lacking in this movie. You get a couple of moments of it, but it's a little bit more emphasis around the personal relationships of the brothers, what they're going through individually, and how they're trying to bond together, and plays a lot more into that. But having all these characters back on screen and seeing how they work together, especially going off the first movie, because now they're working, you know, more along with Mary Beth, that character, adds a lot more elements and a lot more depth into this movie, and all in all, like, really enjoyed watching it. So The Accountant 2 will be out in theaters later this month. We have all of these characters coming back to solve a new puzzle, essentially around finding a family, specifically the child, as they believe, you know, he's been abducted or something's going on there, and they want to get this family back together. We get a lot of depth of characters here, building on these relationships and knowing these characters and individuals more, which is pretty great, and having them together on screen with some pretty incredible action moments is really fun as well. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy this movie. I can definitely see how some may find it a little lackluster or boring, because it definitely steers a little bit away from the first one from the accounting perspective, but I think everything else falls in line pretty well. And I would definitely say we would hopefully get a third movie. I think this could be set up to be a pretty fun trilogy if Amazon Studios wants to invest more in it. So are you excited about seeing The Accountant 2? I know this video is going to come out a little bit early, so definitely when you see Accountant 2, drop me a note in the comments of what you thought. Are you a fan of 1, 2? Do you have a preference? Would you like to see a third? I think there could be some fun conversation there. Thanks so much for stopping by. If you're new here, be sure to like and subscribe. Try to get videos out on a regular basis. I'll be back again real soon with more reviews. We'll see you soon.